Welcome to Men's Net. We're glad you're with us. My name is Mel Feit. I'll be hosting the show. Tony Nazzaro is our executive producer. Okay, this is going to be a difficult show for me to do. I do not want to talk about this, and I do not want to think about this, and I do not want to deal with any of this. I mean, even thinking about talking about this makes me depressed and sad and angry. I'm angry. I'm not really sure who to be angry at. A bad thing was done to me, and I don't know who's responsible for it. I suppose you could say my parents did it, but I don't think they're guilty, or maybe they are guilty. I don't even know. We're going to talk today about male circumcision, but by my lexicon, male genital mutilation. I'm sorry, I don't know what other word to use. And I want to caution you, we're going to have a dignified discussion. But there is no way for us to have an honest discussion about this subject without being somewhat explicit, both physiologically and sexually. So if that is a concern of yours, please take this opportunity to turn away to a rerun of The Waltons. This is going to be a more honest discussion. Here's what people need to know. The foreskin of the penis is covered with lots of sensitive nerve endings and is intended to be a sensitive part of a man's sexual anatomy, and one of its functions is to cover and protect the head of the penis, known as the glans. Basically, the glans is meant to be an internal part of a man's body, and when over many years it is uncovered and exposed to the elements, it gradually becomes calloused and toughened, and a lot of the sensitivity that's supposed to be there is lost. Now, how would you know that? I mean, if you're a circumcised man, what do you have to compare it to? Sex is pleasurable. Orgasms are pleasurable, intimacy is pleasurable, but if you are a man who is circumcised in infancy, then a lot of the pleasure that you were meant to have, that was your birthright to have, that you were intended to enjoy throughout your adult years, throughout your years of sexual activity, a lot of that is lost. It was taken from you. It was cut away from you in a really brutal and violent attack when you were helpless to prevent it. I don't know how you can call this anything other than an assault on male sexuality. But let's see what our guests have to say. We have a really great panel today to talk about this. Joining us on Men's Net to talk about the subject is Laurie Evans. Laurie is with the National Organization of Circumcision Information Resources Centers, which is also known as NOCIRC. She is the director of the New York Hudson Valley chapter of NOCIRC. She brings expertise and a commitment to this cause to our panel, and we are delighted to have you on Men's Net. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Also on the panel is Jeremy Proctor. Jeremy is an author and an activist with a wealth of information and a background on the historical and cultural relevance of circumcision, and we're pleased to welcome you to Men's Net. Thank you for being here, Jeremy.
Thanks for having us.
And rounding out our panel is a favorite of ours on this show, frequent contributor to Men's Net, Ms. Paula Young. We put Paula on the show because, she sits there, looks good, doesn't really criticize or disagree with anything that anybody has to say, not opinionated at all. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Behave yourself, okay?
I'll try.
Okay. All right. You know what? We're here to talk about male circumcision, but I would like to establish a frame of reference for our audience. And, there are places in this world that perform female circumcisions. Now, I am not an expert on it the way you are, but it just seems to me that cutting away a sensitive part of a woman's body is a barbaric, disgusting, grotesque thing to do. And yet there are places in the world that they do it, and I want to know what it is they do and why. If we had people from those cultures sitting here, what they would say about why they do it. So just start by talking about what female circumcision is and why they do that.
Well, I can talk a little bit about it without necessarily claiming to be an expert on it, but I think basically what you are trying to do is similar to what people were trying to do with male circumcision in this country in the Victorian era, which is basically to minimize your libido. It was basically to minimize your genitalia and the dangers that represented.
Yeah, but here's what I want to know, Jeremy. If
Yes.
we had people from those cultures, where did they do it, by the way? Where did they perform
Female circumcision? Well, they still do.
Where?
In many parts of Africa and the Arab world, it's still very actively.
Okay. If I had people,
Somalia and Sudan.
okay, if I had people from Somalia and Sudan sitting on this panel and I asked them, why do you do it? I'm sure that they would come up with good reasons why it was necessary to hurt a woman that way, to destroy.
Well,
what would they say?
My guess is that they're going to say you're not being given over to those libidinous pleasures. That kind of carnality makes you a more focused, dutiful, responsible individual, and somebody who, I think it could be argued, is in line with a male expectation in that culture.
Which is not to be sexually...
Right, not to be willful, not to have a roving eye. You're only there for your reproductive purpose. Now, what's backfired a lot is that a lot of men don't like women who've had this infibulation or female circumcision.
What is it exactly? Is it removal of the clitoris? Is it
It
removal of part of the clitoris?
depends a lot on the culture. There are all sorts of variations on it. Mostly it's the removal of the clitoris, which is called clitoridectomy or clitorectomy. There are also more, perhaps you would call thorough violation of the female genitals that include the labia minora as well. Some of
Is
these
there anything
women.
analogous? Is female circumcision in any way analogous to male circumcision in the
People bring this up a lot, and people bring it up, well, it's not the same thing. And I don't like those kind of fractional arguments at all. I mean, I think everyone's birthright is genital integrity, and I think anybody, irrespective of where they come into the world, has the right to keep that intact into adulthood. If they choose to change it at that point, it's their option. And I don't think any of us would argue with that option or that right. However, I would say for the female, it's important to remember the sort of anatomical analogs, and the female analog of the foreskin, which is removed in male circumcision, is the clitoral hood.
Correct, and a removal of the clitoral hood, which is sometimes done, then would be an analogous procedure to male circumcision, is that correct?
You might say so, but Laurie's brought something very handy, which is this constitutes the surface area of an adult male foreskin.
Well, let me turn to Laurie then and have her describe. All right, let's talk about what we're here to talk about. Tell us what it is, what there is that's done during male circumcision, and the harm that's done. Tell people what they need to know that they don't already know.
What makes me sad, because I exhibit at baby conferences and parents come and speak to me and they say that they were not given this information before they made their decision. And after they talk to me, they say that if they had had this information, they wouldn't have allowed it. So what parents need to know is that at birth, the foreskin is attached to the glands like the nail to the nail bed. So before they cut, they have to detach. It's meant to be a moist internal organ like your eye. You would never imagine rubbing your eye without your eyelid.
You're talking about the glands.
Yes.
It's meant to be a moist internal organ.
Yes, exactly.
Removal of the foreskin is somewhat structurally equivalent to removing the eyelid?
Well, when you rub your eyelid, you put your finger over, when you rub your eye, you put your finger over the eyelid. And the movement of the eyelid, because the foreskin eventually retracts back. And sometimes the average age is around 10. But what they remove grows to become 10 to 15 square inches of erogenous tissue. So if you take this index card and fold it, this is the inner moist part, the outer skin, like this. That's 12 to 15 square inches of erogenous tissue.
Okay. So what happens to the adult male when he's been circumcised in infancy? Is there any way for you to quantify the loss that he experiences in terms of the foreskin removal and also the glands? Does the glands lose its sensitivity as well? What happens?
Well, the foreskin is the most sensitive part, and maybe Jeremy knows about the recent study that's been done. But there is a lot more, women have told me, thrusting during lovemaking, because when you're missing this erogenous tissue, a man has to work harder to have his pleasure than if he had this erogenous tissue. So the loss impacts the man, but it also impacts his partner.
But you can quantify it, I think, very effectively by saying the foreskin constitutes 50% of the penile surface area. You're losing about 50% of the external penis by taking off. You are literally minimizing the penis in a culture that worships at the god of a larger. I mean, I get spam every day for increasing the size of your penis, and it doesn't really jive with taking 50% of it away.
Was there a historical aim here to stop masturbation?
Absolutely. Circumcision took hold in the Victorian era in this country, propelled mostly by John Kellogg, who we have as a household word of Kellogg's cornflakes, and he was an absolute medical and nutritional star of his day. He was like Deepak Chopra and Dr. Phil and Dr. Ruth all rolled in together, and he had a great influence on medical practice at the time, which included things like yogurt enemas and things like that. But it also included circumcision was to literally nip